We are going to start with a couple remarks from the Deputy Associate Director of Vulnerability Management. So it's a large organization. We're the newest federal agency, but we cover a lot of ground in the cybersecurity world. And our little corner focuses on vulnerabilities, everything from thinking about the real-time approach of, hey, we found one, what do we do? So we help lead the coordination around Log4j. In fact, Justin, who many of you know, basically worked, well, many of you worked 16, 18, 20-hour days. Justin did it to create a single file that sort of tracked almost everything that was affected or not affected on GitHub. So that's something we do for sort of real-time response and coordinated vulnerability disclosure, but also looking ahead. So in addition to SBOM and the Secure by Design work that Executive Associate Director Eric Goldstein talked about, we're also doing things like pushing for some better solutions for software identity that we've already talked about. So lots of moving pieces. Sarah helps run them all. So let's see if we can get a Sarah in the room.
Thank you, Allan. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, that's a great start after lunch. So I wanted to first welcome you all back from lunch for those of you in person in LA. And I wanted to say, I just wish I could join you guys all in Los Angeles. I'm a big fan of Southern California. I have a lot of family out in that area, having started my life in San Diego. So I wanted to start with some thank yous. We wanted to thank all of you guys that have joined the working groups, shared thoughts, or just listened to make sure we weren't doing anything, that didn't make sense along the way, and to work through all of the issues that made all of this possible. In particular, we wanted to thank our co-chairs who help keep these groups on a steady keel. It's a lot of work, and we really appreciate the hard work you do. This morning was a great opportunity to see an incredible range of activities. It's heartening to hear about all the progress that's been made, and we're really excited to hear where things are headed this afternoon. It's clear from looking around the room and online how diverse the SBOM community is, from the new community members to join for the first time, and from our international partners beginning and ending our day, all the way to the range of backgrounds and perspectives we're each bringing into the conversation all day. It's as diverse as the software world itself. We come with different priorities and different risks depending on the sector. Its needs and technology that we use. All of this goes into the diversity of the software and the need for SBOM. We each have common goals and a different path to get there. Later this afternoon, we'll hear about the EO implementation and the self-attestation form, as well as we'll get an update from our friends at METI in the Japanese government. It's really nice for them to join us in what will be very early in the morning for them. Now, however, we're going to go to one of our key points in our SBOM-orama, a chance to share thoughts and propose new ideas for the community to consider. As we begin this conversation, we want to ask for your patience. There are a lot of you here. Think anywhere between 500 to 900 between the people in the room and online. So there's a lot of you, a very dynamic conversation for this afternoon, and we'll be watching the chat to keep an eye on who's in queue to speak, both online and in the room. So quick reminder, this community is a group of dedicated people really trying to do their best. As always, please be respectful and assume the best intent of each other. Try to refrain from direct criticism, especially in the chat forum. And remember, this is just the start of our conversations. The CISA SBOM team is here for you, and we really hope to follow up if there are important things to share and to continue the dialogue after the SBOM-orama concludes. Thank you. Hand it back over to you, Allan. Kick off the afternoon.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah. We're glad that you and some of the other folks at CISA have been watching along, and there's still a lot of work to be done. And this is now the time to sort of ask for your expertise, for your contributions. Those of you who attend the working group calls know that it's really easy to go in a whole bunch of different directions. So we're going to try to have a little bit of structure as we collectively brainstorm. And we're going to start off, and I'll use a metaphor that's been part of SBOM and the SBOM community for a while. I think it's originally something that was advanced by Josh Corman, but a lot of us have started to use it, which is we talk about crawl, then walk, then run. And so we're going to start by picking up where Josh and Adi left us, which is the beginning phases What are some of the things that we collectively can do to make it easier and cheaper and more efficient for folks to start down this path? And then we're going to pivot to some of the advanced side of things, which is how do we make sure that we're trying to future-proof this? How do we make sure that the work that we do today doesn't just get wildly overtaken by new issues? I'll admit, for example, that I was a skeptic of reproducible builds. I used to say, for 20 years, we've been 5 years away from reproducible builds. But there really has been a lot of great progress there. So what are some of the things that we should look forward to and make sure we're aligned to? And then the last thing, and again, we only have about 70 minutes on the agenda, so we're going to have to be efficient in our comments. But the last thing is, what are some of the things that we can do, both at CISA and the broader SBOM community, to make sure that we're not wasting people's time, but actually promoting active engagement and more effective progress. So that's our plan for this discussion. Those of you watching along remotely, the amazing team of Jeremiah, Will, and Justin are watching the chat, and they'll try to chime in. If you have some comments, they'll try to sort of share them with the broader room, or you can always raise a hand. And for those of you here in the room, we definitely want to hear from you. We're just going to ask two things. One, I love that we don't really have to enforce this rule because everyone understands it, which is be respectful and no product pitches. And that's kind of awesome. There are very few spaces in cybersecurity where people don't come together and try to shove their company into the conversation. But the other thing is, of course, we want to be brief. So try to keep remarks 1 minute. This is your chance to not just ask questions, but to give comments and tell us what to do. Okay, so that's the plan. Let's see if we can do it. Let's start with that first question, which is, building on what Sarah said, which is we have common goals, we have different paths. How do we sort of nudge ourselves to making progress for the folks for whom this is scary or just hard? What are some of the things that we can collectively do? This is one of the most tricky parts of running these events is I always feel like a late night radio DJ waiting for someone to call to give us ideas. We've got a comment in the room, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Betsy Soren-Jones from Fortress. I think one of the things that would be really helpful for us if we could put some talking points together for non-technical users, especially at the C-suite level, that as we're having a lot of these discussions with the larger stakeholders who at the end of the day are going to have to fund a lot of these programs within their organizations, sometimes it's a little difficult to try and get the understanding of how pervasive some of these things are, what this really means to them as a business decision. And so I think that if I think of all the different sectors, that's a lot of C-suites and a lot of boards that are going to have to take up this topic. Having some common, definitions is helpful, but having common ways that we talk about it would also be incredibly helpful.
Great, thank you so much. That's fun. Checking in with the team back there.
Give us 1 sec.
Oh, thank you, guys. Yeah, I know that the chat is very busy. So yeah, anyone have a reaction here to the idea of an executive-aimed audience? Some of you are executives, I know that. All right, we've got in the room, we've got Chris and then Duncan.
Yeah, I think, I think it might be worth sort of compiling our experience. I know I've had this conversation lots and lots of times, and I try to explain it in ways, my favorite way to say it is, those trillions of dollars we spent on software, we're not sure where we put it.
Yeah, great. So tracking this, and this is the management side piece. Yeah.
Hi, Duncan Sparrow. The awareness adoption group, or on-ramps and adoption group, does have that as sort of one of its items on its list. We'll take that as feedback and now sort of bump it up on the priority. It has actually been on my list for a while. I do think we have to speak in terms of finance and risk and probabilities, and in the long run, how it's really going to make it cheaper for your company to do it rather than less. But we have to say it in words they'll understand and actually have the data to back it up. So I think the other thing that's going on in on-ramps and adoption, I think they talked about, is the success stories. I think we need more of them, because that's what you can also carry to the C-suite. Hey, look, A, B, and C did it and got this value, and we got a couple of them going already. Thanks.
That's a huge piece, which is showing that it's possible and that it's helped. And there are a number of large organizations, global companies that have done this, but it's also, I think, something that we want to think about for smaller organizations as well. And this might be an interesting role for some of the SBOM vendors that are watching and that are here, which is, hey, without making it a marketing pitch, can we tell success stories? Can we bring that to the table?
Yeah, that's a good point. Rendell Swart, Grammatech vendor. But I think it does make sense for the community to look at how SBOM and SBOM regulation and how we generate it and the impact to an organization, how that affects different industries and what industries have regulatory needs, what industries don't. Also within the C-suite, there's different roles, of course, finance, legal, operations, engineering, what have you. All these different roles, SBOMs and the creation of SBOMs is meaningful to their roles and why, and starting to understand from a stakeholder perspective, why is it important to you, not just for the CISO, but for other people involved in the generation of an SBOM, or making sure that an SBOM has been ingested and is properly stored in an organization. I know, hospital organizations deal with this tremendously, and making it easier for medical device manufacturers and hospitals to sync that information at scale, I think is something that we're trying to deal with a lot.
I'm gonna put you on the spot to make 2 lightning recommendations, which is pick a C-suite or board role that you think we should start with, and then name a sector that we haven't heard from today that you think we should do some outreach or pull in.
Yeah, so we've talked about medical devices and automotive, maybe eVTOLs, vertical lift takeoff companies, because there's a lot of those starting to happen now, aerospace, and the need to document not only regulatory compliance with, let's say, MISRA and other things, but also for SBOM compliance. But I think legal is a big one, and making sure that we understand the licensing, that we've got compliance with licensing. I think that's important.
Awesome, thank you. And I love the idea of going after a brand new industry that's trying to build up a good reputation, so that's fun. Checking in with the CISA team, I'll just wait for you to raise a hand. And in the meantime, we've got Kate.
We're finding people are taking the terms coming out of these working groups and adopting them and using them for something that's different. Underneath, we've got namespace collision, we've got namespace stomping going on. Has there been any thoughts about doing things like trademarking and so forth, such that we have some degree of being able to say, don't do that?
There are strong concerns with the US government trademarking things. Many of you have scars from Styx and Taxi. But I think, to your point, for terminology, there are some early SBOM documents that try to define things. We all use words a little differently.
I was thinking more like VEX as a concept. Really should have been aligned with what ART has come up with from a group, okay?
Thank you, yeah.
So there seems to be some way to say, this is VEX, this is not VEX, things like that. We don't have that right now.
Fantastic, thank you, yeah. And I think the work that the ART and the VEX group has done to sort of at least define the basics gets us there. And as we hear about more confusion, yeah, that's definitely something that group can do. Okay.
Thank you, Allan. John Taplett, Certas. So riffing on what Chris said earlier, and borrowing your 2 questions as to who should we go after, one of the things that we've done is talking to COOs and talking about it in terms of operational uptime. They've put a huge amount of money into software and hardware across their industries. It is sunk costs. They know it's there, and they actually don't know what they own and where they've put it. And so if you can put it in context of these are the things you need to update, these are the things you need to patch, and you need to know what you own so that you can increase your uptime, it puts it in terms of dollars and cents pretty quickly.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, making this a functional part of operation. It's not just, hey, get some data. It's operational. Helen.
Many great points. Thank you. What I wanted to also add is the exchange for cloud. For internal transparency, it absolutely makes sense to generate and have management of SBOMs. But what exactly are we exchanging with our vendors? And do we even have to do that? Or do we rely on some other processes for building that trust?
Yes, and definitely looking forward to you and your team's feedback on what the cloud group has been doing and how we can move that faster and more effectively.
Hi, Emily Fesnack, cybersecurity at Deloitte. A number of clients we've been talking to who are interested in building out solutions or have questions about SBOMs in this space have really been focusing on what are the repercussions if we don't comply. I don't know if this kind of overreaches into any of that federal guidance discussion that we shouldn't be touching on, but that's a common question that I've been hearing a lot is, well, what if we just don't comply and we accept that risk, and is there anything that's actually going to happen?
Oh, it's a fun question. I know Josh touched on that from a private contract perspective. We'll hear in just a little bit from Sean and her amazing team at CISA on what that looks like. It is not for me to say what happens if you don't do what the US government tells you, but you know, we can go on from there. Bruce, and just as a request, just briefly introduce yourself and tell people what your affiliation
Bruce
is.
Lowenthal. Was I ahead of you? I'm sorry if I was. I'm basically head of the PCERT for Oracle Corporation and some other things, but that's what I do. I was going to take the tact that I think people should get informed of what happens if they do comply so that they can be prepared. So there's what if you don't and what if you do. And I think a lot of things that are going to happen that are predictable, and other organizations have found this out. For example, people are going to start saying they want to have fixes immediately, and you're going to have to deal with the fact that if it's a fifth party vulnerability, that you have to get the fourth party and the third party to upgrade, and you can't. You're going to have to watch your contracts so you don't get things in there that are impossible to do now that people have this information. So, and I think it makes it less afraid for people because they can quantify what the risk is if they understand what the consequences are.
Thanks, Bruce. And I'll also point out that Bruce has actually been an early fan of SBOM, but also a realist about what it means for him and his team. So I think that's a really good point as we start to implement this. And the one other thing I'll say is the combination of mistakes, right? As everyone starts down this road, we are all going to be together, right? No company is going to be the only one publishing this. It's a big part of why we're doing this collectively. And so, yes, everyone's got one part of their supply chain that they're not really proud of. They keep needing to fix it, but you know, priorities. And so we need to sort of have a certain amount of patience and tolerance and grace on that front. Oh, thank you, excuse me. Please.
Yeah. Hi, Anand Revashetty. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Lineage. Coming from the security side of the world, more from threat detection, one of the things which I feel, one of the things I feel SBOMs are not addressing today is related to active content. And what I mean by active content is, if you install an AV software, almost every hour there is a stream of active content that can literally screw around with your system. If you are visiting a website, I can have a steganographic JPEG file which is compromising your system. So what work is being done in order to identify and then address this? And this portion is not as static as SBOMs. This keeps changing. So maybe it is more dynamic than a VEX, but there has to be some working group to address this. That would be one place I would request.
Yeah, the active side is key. There are a number of folks that have been really promoting the idea of runtime SBOM, but I'm not even sure that that covers this kind of risk. Tim.
Tim Walsh, security analyst at Mayo Clinic. Early on in the NTIA, somewhere in there, we did a document that highlighted use cases. And one of the things that I do to evangelize SBOMs is the groups that I'm speaking to, I go through those lists of use cases and highlight the ones that will resonate the best with my audience and show them the positive aspects of what SBOM can do for the business. A few of the ones that we listed in there actually benefit efficiencies and lower costs. And those are some of the ones that I like to highlight to some of the groups. I did a physician leadership group yesterday, and I highlighted to them that one of the advantages of SBOM is that now we can actually start doing device lifecycle management in a much more sane fashion. Instead of waiting for every 10 years for Windows to reach end of life, we can now actually plan 3, 4, 5 years out and say, where is our capital spending need to be spent because these devices are reaching end of life, using that as a way to explain the power of SBOM of once we have it in a fully functioning system. So I don't know if we need to do more documents and awareness and adoption, but I just thought I'd remind everybody that that's a thing.
So one, I love the story that you shared in more detail yesterday about how physicians got excited about this. Like, that for me is just a great victory for cybersecurity in general. This is seen as something that's key to organizations doing, or humans protecting other humans, is that cybersecurity is a part of that. Chris.
I just want to respond to our Deloitte colleagues' question about not complying, and taking out props to the underpaid, overworked federal employees, because in this country they actually won't tell you. But I'm private sector, so I can, right? You know, if it's actual compliance and regulation, whatever jurisdiction you're in, whatever country you're in, obviously that's important. But I'm hearing this now. If you're not going to provide an SBOM, you're not on the vendor list anymore. You know, I'm hearing the real repercussion of not doing SBOM is you're saying to your potential customers, we're not really confident, we're not quite sure where we put things, but buy our stuff. And it's a sort of ham-handed answer, but that's literally happening today.
What does it mean if someone wants you to put their software on your network or your data in their software, and they can't even tell you about their roadmap to track all these pieces? So let's see, we've got a fun queue over here, and just checking back with my team, so I'll keep glancing back to see if we've got some voices online. But yes, Cassie.
There's a lot still in the chat that we'll need to go through. Cassie Crossley, Schneider Electric. I would like for us to start discussions on embedded software and firmware, because trying to explain why we're using certain libraries, they're affiliated with the chips and other areas that we need. The CISA ICT task force is going to be releasing soon the HBOM document, so I think it's a good time for us to really join that for those of us that have to provide a full product BOM.
Nice. I like that. I was just chatting with Alex, who's doing some great work in the Air Force, about the need to sort of have maybe some targeted conversations about the broader OT world, and then we can specialize in from there. Yeah.
Surendra Pathak from Interlink. There are a lot of organizations, especially this working group, that has been focused on SBOM curiosity and adoption. But there are a lot of organizations which are focused mostly from compliance angle, generally OMB memo and the self-attestation. And I don't know if it touches the policy side, but when you talk to them, they are not thinking of SBOM and SSTF attestation in this different view. For them, it's part of the same thing. And I don't think as a group, we have done a good job of like putting here are the good set of requirements, you comply with everything and you get all the compliance that it needs.
It's a great point. And that's something that we at CISA and the US government need to do a good job of balancing. Thank you for raising that.
Hi, Alex Wright with the U.S. Air Force. I guess to also kind of off the conversation earlier about non-compliance, the one thing too to consider is that I can definitely say from the government side is that one way of getting around compliance is to just get a waiver. So that's a very common way of not complying. And then I guess second too is as we do work, I think one thing that I'd like to see maybe is if we start compiling a list of actual success stories that we have with SBOM. I can think of some very powerful and loud people that are SBOM deniers, and sometimes convincing them has not been too helpful. An interesting statement that I heard a week ago is SBOM is a solution looking for a problem. And it's very difficult to convince people of the value of them, but I think if we start to actually have true success stories of real metrics of money saved, manpower hours saved, or some other form of metrics, it might help bring these into fuller adoption.
Thank you. And did you guys know that SBOM is not a silver bullet that will solve all of our problems? It's true. People are still writing blogs about that. Yeah, thank you.
Hey there, James Kaseha with Army ASALT DAS, and so I think we're kind of down the road of implementation, and I think one of the things that might add a lot of value is if there's a data model to help visualize, hey, here's the minimum required fields, here's what would supplement from a out-of-station perspective, and anything else that we need to add from a open source provenance or more of just, incident response type things. I think that would go a long way to helping people visualize it.
Oh, I love that idea. We'll talk a little bit about how we're going to do that in a moment.
Mark Galpin, principal architect at Tidelift. So I just wanted to comment kind of related to some of this talk about like the C-suite and some other things. The thing that really stood out to me today that I was really excited to hear about was that the onboarding team is starting to look at how we talk to acquisition and procurement. And I think I'd be really excited to kind of take that a little bit further, right? If we're going to be serious about starting to call software a supply chain, who are the people in this world that actually care about a supply chain? Right, and I think sometimes, a lot of this movement comes out of cybersecurity, comes out of software development. Most of us consider procurement to be the enemy. But I was making a joke to somebody that last night that a lot of the challenges that procurement talked about in open source, we're discovering 20 years later that they weren't entirely wrong, and now we're trying to fix it. So yeah, I just wanted to comment that I was really excited to see that, and was wondering whether we've kind of thought more about kind of that sort of whole viewpoint and that sort of real just supply chain viewpoint on software and trying to really bring supply chain people into it.
Yeah, I like that, and I think as we pivot to what comes next, right, the transparency is the starting point. What are some of the things that we should make sure we're queuing up? And I think as we sort of have gotten our basics here, if there are any other voices about, hey, what are some of the basics that we should talk about, then we can sort of pivot to that side of the house. I just want to see if there's any last comments on, hey, how can we address skeptics, drive business decisions, things like that. Give us a success story now. Yeah, give us we've got time for a cool anecdote.
So right before Log4j, Art sent me a note, Art Mannion, and I got about 7 a.m. And by 10, all 300 of our products groups had been notified with that had a Log4j in their product, and were told exactly what they needed to do to fix the issues and started on the fixes. And within about 10 days, all products were fixed.
That's really cool.
The stuff I was talking about negative was we need the balance earlier, but people should be able to do this today. And with an interchange like SBOMs, we're going to be able to get this information to each other, and we ought to take advantage of the interchange format, SPDX or EncycloDX, to be able to build that up for our organizations.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I think we've got Ricardo and then Daniel.
Hi, Ricardo Reyes with TideLift. I want to go back to the actual working groups, Allan, where I think that, I participate in all the working groups every day of the week. And so I attend them, sometimes just to listen in, sometimes I participate in the actual off work that we have to do, like writing documents and so forth. Some of the things that I think we could improve in the working groups would be to be more inclusive. And that's mostly awareness and adoption of these working groups, because sometimes we have 40 participants, but then that doesn't include the big tech companies, doesn't include other big integrators in the federal government who are actually serving and are going to be responsible to comply with the M2218 policy and the SBOM attestation. So I feel like if we have more awareness and inclusiveness and bringing them to the equation of the discussions, I think we'll have different perspectives on some of the documents that are being produced. That's just my opinion. And also another point that I would like to think to improve would be to have, sometimes there's a lot of characters with a lot of strong personalities. So if we could have some sort of like offline one-on-one with them and get their perspective written down on paper, and then bring in those thoughts clearly and precisely on a document, then we can discuss it with the group, I think is a better approach than just like spending an hour diving deep down on an actual topic that may not be important. That's just my thought.
Thank you, Ricardo. It's great feedback. In just a little bit, we're going to loop back to the working groups and other alternative models, but we will go there. We got a question or a comment from online.
Yeah, can we invite Hank to test his audio and ask a question?
Hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead, Hank.
So I want to back up that Schneider Electric point about firmware. I'm in automotive, and most of our suppliers are supplying us with their libraries or SDKs, and they're known to have vulnerabilities. But currently, we're talking only about open source. What about these other code packages? Is that part of the SBOM working group, is to somehow identify these other types of libraries or code that's not necessarily open source, but does have vulnerabilities that we can trace?
No, great point. Certainly, and I've got a lot of nods in this room, especially from some of the people who manufacture stuff, is, hey, proprietary components are still third-party components. Thanks for reminding us. Daniel, and then we'll pivot to thinking, we'll pivot to what's next after we check in with online.
Thanks. Daniel Bardenstein, CTO Manifest. I had to jot down a couple of things to remind myself, a lot of good points being made. To some of the early conversations around leadership C-suite, that we might be able to better talk to and focus about this. Just an interesting nugget that kind of surprised me, having been in enterprise security for a while. The number of times we've heard from companies in the past couple months that their prioritization for SBOM programs actually came from the board level, which was surprising, because typically, a lot of folks target, CISOs are a little bit more closer to, where the work gets done, but a non-zero number of companies talking about actually folks on the board shouting down around SBOM. So that was really interesting. Maybe something that we can explore as a community. How do we target boards? How do we get to that level? Two resources that I think we'd love to see, just in terms of the community that we can help with SBOM adoption. First is maybe a central place to share case studies. We have one thing that we hear all the time is once people get to the point of, okay, I've bought into the idea of SBOMs, but like, how do people actually use them, or what does it look like? There are many of us, including the example that I just shared, that have some good case studies or wins already. Could we have a central repository by sector, by whatever that is, especially because we've heard from auto ISAC, from healthcare ISAC, from financial services, all, like most things sector specific, a little bit isolated. Could we create a central repository of case studies or wins that other people from various sectors could go to? Oh, someone who looks like me, looks like my organization has done this well. Similarly, on compliance, especially international compliance, we all know executive order and the OMB and CRA. There's some others that are coming out of Europe as well. I think just like a clear, concise doc for a lot of the folks in the community to understand, like, what is this current state of international regulation or legislation around SBOM's software supply chain? Does it apply to me? If so, how? From what lens? I think would be really interesting. And I think those are main ones. I was going to share some case studies that we had as well around using SBOMs in procurement, which Josh Corman had mentioned earlier, and talking to some folks over lunch, and maybe there's something we can dive into later around what happens once you require SBOMs from your vendors. Some people get not as good response rates, some people do. We've seen a number of cases that would make are nice wins where the vendor provides the SBOM, they're able to analyze it, find issues, communicate that back to the vendor, and then the vendor fixes it and patches it before the software actually gets brought into production. Right? That's pretty awesome. But those are stories that aren't super widely shared, or how do we as a community share, again, SBOMs in the wild are actually creating value and reducing supply chain risk. Super powerful. So would love to see and help contribute to those.
Fantastic. I want to go online, and also I want to flag, in a moment we'll make sure that this doesn't all end up on the on-ramps and adoption plate, but I think there's definitely some great ways that we can try to collaborate on these different pieces in a moment. Yes, Justin.
Not necessarily a specific question, but a lot of chatter around software identity. Do you want to make some comments about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So software identity, right? Anyone who's been in the software world for the last 10 years knows that this is a hard problem, right? People are rediscovering it now because it's SBOM. But the other thing to remember is that this is not unique to the SBOM world. So CISA, in partnership with our friends at NIST, tries to drive all of the infrastructure that we all collectively use. And we know that a lot of that's outdated. And so one of the things we're doing at CISA is coordinating with different parts of the ecosystem, not just the SBOM community, to make sure that we can drive progress. Because again, if this is just an SBOM solution, it's going to fall flat on its face. If it's just a commercial software vendor solution, it's going to fall flat on its face. So we're going to be doing some work. I know that everyone loves more chances to write things, to tell the government stuff. This summer, we're going to be sort of issuing a little white paper with some questions, suggesting some potential directions. We don't want to presuppose the solution. So stay tuned on that. The one thing we're asking for patience is, as you think about this challenge of the naming problem, what do we call things? Just remember that any approach that we have has to actually scale. It can't just be for one little community. It can't just be for one use case. And so that's what we're trying to do in making sure that it's a way that builds on and can accommodate a plan for the entire vulnerability ecosystem and the entire software ecosystem. So that's sort of where we're coming from. We've heard from a number of you, and we know that this is a little bit of an obstacle as folks scale. And one of the things that I love hearing from all of you is we can still do a lot of it, but if we want to do it even better, especially in a fully automated fashion, we're going to need to make some progress in this space. All right, we're going to wrap up this sort of the basic side of things with one comment from Duncan.
So just as Duncan Sparrow, Fractal Consulting, I am on a board, and since I'm on a board, I get board training. So this is to Daniel's comment earlier, hitchhiking on it and bringing it back to Alan's original question. So being on a board, you have to take board training. And so I'm a member of the National Association of Corporate Directors. And at a meeting just about 3 weeks ago, it's an 8-hour training day, and won a whole hour. And those of you who know me know I'm a huge SBOM advocate, have been for a long time. I did not put this on the agenda. On their agenda was 1 hour on SBOM and what corporate directors needed to know about it and what they needed to do, which is what was driving some of what Daniel's saying. So congrats to Allan for bringing it around to that.
I had nothing to do with that, by the way. That is amazing. That has been one of the most fulfilling things about being in the SBOM world, is seeing all this stuff just happen. All right, so we've talked about how we can get folks started. It's time to gaze deep into the future and say, let's imagine a world where we have SBOMs out there. How do we tie this to all the other things that we see coming down the pipe? And we don't necessarily need to say, oh, I'm working on this project, or there's this brand new standard that's just getting started. But I do want to sort of ask this group of experts who, right, startups are looking far into the future. Companies have long time horizons as they plan. What are some of the things we should be doing to make sure that SBOM and the related efforts are aligned with what we think the future might hold? I'll add that I am a terrible prognosticator. I told all my friends that this iPhone thing would never take off. People were never going to abandon their BlackBerry. So I'm the wrong guy to sort of pick the winner in technology. And I don't think we want to pick a winner because a lot of this stuff is nascent. And we've all seen standards fall over because everyone's like, that is very clever. No one's going to use it. So we don't want to pick the winners, but we do want to start thinking about the longer term integrations. Kate.
AI and the fact that data and models are different concepts. So building up that we have to be able to have the transparency there to understand the risk of using them. And so I think they fit into the whole mindset of an SBOM quite nicely, and we don't have a lot. We've been focusing on code, and models are code, but then how have they been trained, how have they been shaped, which is the same sort of thing like you'd be building source code, right? You'd be training your model. So having a language and extending the SBOM concepts to handle that, I think is going to be key for sort of the next generation, especially as we see all these self-driving cars, all of these aspects of the infrastructure.
Fantastic, thank you. And this is something that, first of all, by the way, I can't believe that we've been at this for this many hours, and Kate is the first person to mention AI. There is some work starting, and or been around for data card and model cards and things like that. But and some of you know my assistant colleague John O. Spring, who's been doing some work on this in a past life. So transparency in the AI world, definitely something we want to track. You're going to have to point to, yes, please.
Hey everyone, Nicholas Vidovich, product manager with Finite State. The way that I'm thinking about a lot of this is the SBOM is a portion of what we're going to be willing to share. The other half, I think, right in the middle of the entire software development lifecycle is attestation about your software development practices, the security of your software development, your secure software lifecycle. So even if you're not willing to share specifically the SBOM or even the details, or if we start talking about redacted SBOMs, being able to attest that your software development lifecycle has tools like SAST and SCA and DAST and other things as a provider, I think is very important for that middle. And I think what we're missing right now is some of the potential standards for communicating that. We don't really have the way to share this information. And I think it gets into this problem of we're going to have several potential marketplaces, if you will, of this information. And being able to have vendors use their own platform or shared platforms and being able to share across those platforms, I think is a major part of what's going to facilitate adoption of this overall, where if you're an asset owner and you have 100 vendors or 1,000 vendors, how do you actually collect all that information from all those vendors? If you're a vendor and you have thousands of customers, how do you effectively share that when you've got a bunch of diverse potential marketplaces? That's what I'm thinking about in the middle of the whole
I want to ask you a follow-up question on attestations in particular, because I think there are two increasingly common ways of using that word attestation. One of them is, right, the signed PDF, right? There's a form, and I've signed it, and it's legally binding because someone very senior has signed it. And then, this is more forward-looking, there are the attestations that come directly from my software process, and those are signed, but those are signed by the technology itself. Do you think those can coexist, or do you think we should be finding a way to sort of just treat them as independent, or do you think we can find a way to sort of integrate them?
I think they should coexist. I think you make a very good point. I think closer to the left of, shifting left in the software development lifecycle, I would like to see every part of my supply chain providing a signed version of their SBOM, for example, being able to validate that this actually came from that source. I think attesting to your processes is more along the lines of compliance, and maybe, as an organization, you can sign the document, but behind that is actual people that are, saying, yes, we have these processes. Yes, we have this software system in place. Yes, we're following all of these different compliance procedures.
Great.
And I think it starts to tie into Salsa, it ties into Guac, it ties into the way that we're actually communicating this and exposing the entire supply chain, because that's really what it's going to take, right? Is where did this come from? And if you can't figure out where it came from,
right,
being able to make a risk-based decision based on that as a black box where I don't have the right security context, so I just start to have to make risk-based decisions based on that lack of information even.
Fantastic, thank you. I want to get to Isaac, but first we've got someone online.
Yeah, it's Nisha. Nisha, can you test your mic?
Okay, hi.
We hear you.
Okay, I would like to see us move away from the word SBOM and start thinking about what the cloud and SaaS work call observability, because in the end, SBOM is a kind of introspection and observability metric. And there's a lot more data that we need to be able to extract in a shareable format. Somehow I feel like because the word SBOM, is like a victim of its own success. Is that what the thing is called? The phrasing is. But really, the value is observability. You being able to observe the building of your software is very valuable, because then you can ask questions about it, and you can iterate on it much faster. So that's. And I see a lot of comments around that. Yes, so there are testable assertions that you can make. You can build policy around it. I know that Kate is working on requirements, and it would be awesome to see like a workflow where you start off with requirements, you build policy, and then you use the data that you get from all of these introspections to make sure that you are adhering to your policies. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you put that on the table. Hurts a little bit, given that when we first launched this effort, the term SBOM itself was still seen as radioactive, and industry was terrified of us using it. But I love the idea that the wheel has turned so much that everyone knows it too much, and it's blocking some other future innovation. That's the last thing we want. Let's go to Isaac and then back to our friends online.
Thanks, Allan. And I'm going to build upon, I think, some of the previous questioners and observations they've made. I mean, so I chair the Supply Chain Integrity Working Group in OpenSSF. I work at Google. One of the futures that we see around SBOM is I think that the executive order is doing the useful work of catalyzing the production of transports of metadata from left to right through the supply chain. And what's really interesting is once the industry has built the rails to transport SBOMs from left to right, what else can you load on those trains, right? And those rails that now have been built and they're sunk costs, and there's all kinds of interesting other metadata that you can start to transport through your supply chain, things like salsa provenance, VEX statements, maybe threat intelligence about individual developers, maybe SSDF attestations, some of which may be automated, some of which may be manual. But there's a richness of metadata you can see developing, and then you can generalize or imagine generalizing that into an overall supply chain control plane where you have, you know, a metadata fabric, and you're able to actuate or evaluate and actuate policy based on that metadata at various points through the supply chain. We're building on some of this in the OpenSSF Supply Chain Integrity Working Group. There's a vision document which is linked from the working group homepage. Do check it out. Do come and join us. I'm super excited. And again, I see that the executive order catalyzing this kind of this construction of the transport. And what becomes interesting is what else can you put on that transport?
Fantastic. Thank you. Really exciting. Also, metadata fabric is now going to be my new buzzword that I'm just going to sprinkle in conversation. Yeah. We got online and then Chris.
Yeah. Josh, go ahead.
Hey, so Isaac, you get it. Amen. This is a metadata layer and more to come, and it's pulling through a whole bunch of things that are overdue. 2 points real fast, and I'd be very fast. I don't want to give myself an assignment. Number one, I hinted at it before, but Art Mannion and myself, a bunch of the people that go to first.org, we feel like we're overdue to maybe look at when there's a larger volume and variety of potentially implicated vulnerabilities. We do need to get better at crowd management on moving maybe away from CVSS towards an order of operations of KEV, EPSS, SSVC, whatever they might be. But capturing current practices or evolutions and permutations and the trade-offs seems like a good small piece of work for some people to put some focus on, because it's coming ahead for a lot of tools vendors. And number two is a lot of people complain that the tools vendors aren't ingesting this yet. I know almost all of them are calling me and trying, and some of them are succeeding. One of the obstacles is whenever somebody does a bespoke artisanal, NDA, to get in the way of that. So we did a good job specifying minimum elements and SPDX and CycloneDX. But in this in-between period where people are afraid to share openly, we might want to have a small working group in somebody's group on how the asset inventory management, vulnerability scanners, risk identifiers, governance tools, everyone's trying to ingest the existing SBOMs, but some of the self-inflicted opacity is making that harder. So if there's some common ground where we do the redaction method or the deliberate omission thing, it may accelerate tools being more readily available and cheaper. Over.
Thanks, Josh. That's a great point, and I'm pretty excited because I know that at least 2 major security vendors are going to be rolling out SBOM integration this calendar year. So I think we're going to start seeing more of that. And a little hint to those of you who are security vendors. I think in many spaces, the first in your niche that can say, and we do SBOM, is really going to have a huge advantage. So good thing to put on your product roadmap. Sorry, back to Justin, because I do want to get our online friends, and then we'll go to Chris.
Yes, and I am going to apologize. I will butcher his name, Prozonjit. Can you touch your microphone?
Yes. So I think like there are lots of value having the success stories for different companies of different sizes. So one particular thing that I think is that so company of different sizes has their unique challenges. For example, some of the challenges we have like having identifier for C++ repositories, having identifier for digital assets. So I think some of the software identifier solve this problem piecemeal, but like having some direction on this, like different problem that company of different sizes are facing and how they are solving it, having this information would be useful.
Which is like Beetlejuice to me.
So I think, yeah, they're tracking. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Right?
Yeah.
Not on?
No, we're trying to make sure that we have audio online. We're good? Great.
1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
All right. So a couple thoughts. You asked the question. There's the self-attestation, which in English is "trust me, I swear to God, I really did." And there's automatic attestations, and we can see this in the SBOM world. Predictions looking forward. You will have your tools. You have a relationship with somebody who says, we will attest to things as we do them, and your tools will attest to them. Like, we will give you an SBOM every time we compile. We will have our machine tools attest to you that the temperature range of your product wasn't exceeded. Automatic real-time attestations have to get built into this, if nothing else just for SBOMs because of the sheer volume and complexity. We're not there yet. But an interesting metric on this, 4 years ago when I started using the A word, you say attestation and people just literally look at you with a blank stare. And now we hear the word all the time. So I think there's a little mark on the road going down that path.
I love it. Thanks.
Duncan. Hi, Duncan Sparrow, Fractal again. Before I make my future comment, I do want to make a comment on Nish's comment on observability. Observability arama just doesn't roll off the tongue as well. But my actual comment on the future is, Kate had mentioned AI, which I do think is important to get into. I think we want to look even a little bit further down in the future and start thinking about quantum as well, because it's again a different type of software. We're going to have to redo basically everything to do in security because of the redo of the encryption that's about to come. And I do think getting in on the ground floor of that, because we do have somewhat of a green field in that, so that would be a good place to start. Thanks.
Fantastic. And those of you who track the U.S. government policy, we're right now prioritizing making sure that we're shifting algorithms not to be quantum resistant, but to have the capability to swap out how we're implementing encryption and the related ecosystems. And one thing that often comes up is saying, well, we can have transparency. Both SPDX and CycloneDX have we implement this type of algorithm as part of it. And so that's going to be something that we can start to populate and build databases on, so that you can look at an SBOM of an encryption system and understand, is this something that sort of is forward-looking, or is this something that we're going to have to replace? Okay, one last comment on this, and then we'll get into process. Please.
So, possibly controversial statement about the future, but John Gallagher from Viaku. It seems like there's going to be a point at which this has to be handed over from the government to private industry. And I would hope that the insurers are possibly the ones to take that role in the future of either enforcement or propagation, because it seems like businesses resonate more with those requirements and mandates than perhaps the government.
I like it. Yeah. Our goal at CISA is to get out of this game. Right? If CISA is still trying to ask these, high-level questions 4 years from now, that will not be seen as a sign of success by my leadership. So I like the idea of saying, what are some of the broader economic forces that we can start to leverage? And we talked about boards, we talked about GRC, and yeah, the insurance side is going to be huge. Okay, so many amazing ideas. 7 different working groups. We'll just stand them all up. Everyone gets an hour more a week to do. No, we can't do that. We are already blown away by how many of you give so much of your time. And on one hand, this is exactly how government and industry should work together, right? Has to be collaboration. What are some of the tools that we can do so that we don't just have a, hey, let's do it, and then stare around blankly while we wait for everyone to give up more of their time? How, right, this is the nuts and bolts of it. How can we take our existing working group structure and try to sort of make it a little more efficient, a little more effective? The cloud group has done really amazing work of saying, rather than everyone try to solve everything, let's shrink it down and have 3 different focal points. And we're going to do that. And Nish's group has sort of said, yeah, we've got the basic model, and let's talk colloquially. So Nisha, congratulations. I know it was rough. What are some of the other pieces? As you guys think about this, you've heard this, how can we increase our productivity? And we'll be candid, what do you want from CISA? We have a small team. These guys in the back of the room are amazing. We can make them work harder. They don't need sleep. But what are some of the things that we can collectively do? What was that? Slack channel. Yeah. Oh, thank you for reminding me. That's something that we want to do, and we're going to be rolling it out over the next few weeks, which is people said, hey, why do we only do this for 1 hour a week? Not that we should have more hours, but we should have asynchronous communication. So we're going to start off reasons that you guys don't need to worry about. Mailing lists are hard from inside the government. But we're going to be using existing tools. We'll be using something that comes from Google to launch some mailing lists so that we can actually have some collaboration. This will be opt-in. We will not be able to add anyone to this, but your inbox is going to be filled with reminders for each working group to say, hey, we're launching this. We're going to keep the co-chairs and the CISA team is going to keep a little bit of an eye on it to make sure everyone's using it appropriately. We're not getting marketing. We're not having flame wars. But I'm not really worried about it. You guys know what we're doing. We'll probably have a code of conduct based on, first, because they have had a very successful code of conduct. But again, this community sort of gets how to have respectful collaboration. So that's one piece. And then once we get that set up, if you guys want another Slack, we can work on that side of things, especially as they're sort of very targeted. So we've got Helen and then Daniel.
Daniel first.
Thanks, Allan. Daniel again from Manifest. As someone who's already in 4 Slacks around S-bombs, I'm not sure that another one is going to help, but always willing to try. So for those who know my background, this is not gonna come as a surprise, but having been in most of the working groups, and I try to attend when I can, though I have to do some work as well on the side. It's been my sense and observation that a lot of the outputs are documentation. There's a lot of writing, there's a lot of thinking, and I think that is all well and good. But if we want to accelerate some of the changes and just the overall progress, I'd love to see how we can make it a little bit more, building alongside that. So aside from just, hey, the output of this next sprint of this next quarter is going to be, we're going to have a document, because we have a lot of documents, and CISA has a lot of documents. How do we actually test a hypothesis in a real life environment, a real production center? Like if we have a couple ideas around a VEX format or, how to do sharing, can we divide up maybe people at companies or, some open source stuff, build some prototypes, test them in semi-realistic settings, collect feedback from those implementations, and then bring that back to the table. Again, not surprised given my background, but would love to see how we can bring a little bit more of that, like building iterative attitude towards the working groups and some of the other general SBOM groups that are around, so we can not just hypothesize, but also test the hypotheses and actually see what actually takes in production settings.
I love it. Thank you. One of my heroes in software security, Steve Lipner, once told me, a proof of concept is worth 1,000 multi-stakeholder meetings. So yes, I'm going to go briefly online and then over to Helen.
Thank you. Larry Feldman has patiently been waiting to ask a question. Larry, can you test your audio?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So first of all, I'm attending all CISA meetings and OASIS and very involved with SBOM and other cyber security automation things. So I want SBOM to succeed, absolutely clear. But from my experience, a few years ago, I was working on software identification tag with NIST and with a group which created the second standard. So it was standard edition, and we were thinking it's just ready to go. 2 problems we found out at that point. Going forward, we saw a lot of complexity, what is definitely we can't avoid. And another thing, we thought not so many vendors were I would say, excited about sweet tag. So do we need to think about incentives and something what can be provided to vendors to make it easier for SBOM to be implemented? What do you think, Allan?
Love that idea, which is don't just look at success stories, but look at the history of the things that didn't quite take off. And I think many of you have noted that I'm not worried about SBOM not getting any traction, but if we want to have it be something that's really does be a natural part of how all software is made and sold and used, then yeah, we need to look at the past and, what are some of the stories that we can learn from, all of the IETF and IETU and other standards that, were brilliantly engineered, but maybe didn't have a lot of uptake. Thanks. Allan.
So I think we all can agree that SBOM is very fundamental, but it's not everything in securing the supply chain, software supply chain, and it's just one of the pieces. So what I would like from CISA, and working, of course, collectively as a group here with private sectors and others, is to define the maturity model and common language, how we can identify where is our maturity. For example, generating SBOM is just a beginning, level 1, and so on, so that we can all talk the same language and build that trust based on defined common maturity model for securing the software supply chain.
You hit two really important points. One, I think everyone heard the idea of a maturity model could be very powerful. And is increasingly part of other areas of cybersecurity, so we can build on that success. The other thing you flagged was language. And that's come up in a number of working groups, and it's something that I've heard in a bunch of talks on SBOM by folks around the world, which is, hey, even something as simple as producer versus manufacturer versus vendor versus all these things, and maybe it's time to sort of revisit some language and have some truly tedious semantic conversations and definitional conversations. There are people in this world who get excited about definitions. Maybe they're not the people you want at your parties. But I think that's really important work that needs to be done, because if we're going to communicate about this and we're going to communicate about it globally and build this maturity model, we're going to need to sort of align those things. Oh yeah, we got a quick reaction here. Come on up to the mic, and then we'll go online.
Is that already being done in the life cycle report? I was kind of going through some of that, and it looks like there's already some life cycle stages being mentioned there.
Definitely, we've started a lot of that definitional work. For those of you who weren't involved in sort of the SBOM type or life cycle side, we spent a lot of time arguing about a lot of relatively small worlds, but that's good, right? We want to make sure that we've captured the perspective from everyone. And similarly, the work that Kate and Melissa just presented of sort of going through the original SBOM framing, where we talk about these are the fields, and we'll want to define those a little better. So thank you. I'm glad you flagged that. We've got online.
Yeah, Bhargav, can you unmute?
Yeah, Bhargav. Just at a quick point on the role of CISA, right? We talked about efficiency, right, and as well as the influence of CISA. I think we're heading towards, as we're developing this on the how and the why and the what. I think we have to strike a balance, and maybe also consider an inventory that is allowed, right? Basically, an allowed list of materials. Eventually, right, should be one of the considerations. Without stifling innovation, there has to be a clear single channel pathway for approval of software, so that once this inventory is created for the nation, for example, for this country, that here is a list that you can use in this country, right? And if you want something new to come in, then you need to go through this process, right? So that level of thing will kind of shorten, or kind of improve the efficiency, as well as the attestation process, right? In approving and allowing, software that are not vulnerable.
I think that's powerful, and also sort of speaks to what we're using it for, right? The SBOM doesn't give you all the data. It allows you to map to other sources, and right, different communities can create different allow lists, different deny lists. Obviously, there are other parts of the US government that have very strong rules and increasing interest in this, but we don't have to collectively decide it. Our job in this community is to enable that kind of work to happen. And then we can all point to, right, there are some companies that are already saying, hey, here's some approved open source that we vetted, and that's fine. But anyone can do that. And then you can map your SBOM to that. And going back to the earlier point, at any stage of the life cycle. Go ahead.
Mark from Tidelift again. So Allan, I think one of the things as we talk about like what's next and how do we do it, also to actually give you some credit here, I don't want to say overlook the amount of value you've had in bringing the conversation on SBOM forward. Even if I was somebody the first time I think you talked to me, I said, oh, that's easy. It shouldn't take us very long. And I deeply apologize to you for ever having inflicted those words upon you. I should have known better. But I guess I want to say I don't think we can underestimate the amount of value that has been contributed by the government being a bit of bully pulpit, and also by your own efforts and other people in the government, but to really have the government speak in a united voice saying, yes, this is a thing that matters. This is a step along the path to cybersecurity that matters. And I think when I look for a role from CISA, it is going to be part of that sort of, how do you amplify the voices from the cyber community and the software supply chain community in a way that makes people just aware of the fact that this stuff is important?
I appreciate that. That's certainly something that is, I can point that to my bosses, and in fact, those of you who know Director Easterly, she's talked a lot about SBOM as fundamental all the way down. We appreciate that. We are not here to sort of say, hey, good job, us. What we want is, what else can we do? And no, I appreciate it. And also, by the way, this is your chance to yell at us publicly. So what don't you like? And how can we do it better? We got 8 minutes left, and I know that there's some of you that want to go a little Festivus on us. So, right, Christmas in July, Festivus in June. What are some of your real problems with us people? Oh, Duncan.
So you said you were going to address it, so I really hope you do, but the email list, there's some way to communicate async, because we started, one of the original themes when we started this 5 years ago, and it was a very small group of us, was, hey, Allan doesn't scale. Well, now work streams don't scale. We just have too much to do that we got to figure out some way to do this async. And again, if the emails are coming, great, but please make it actually happen.
Thank you. We hear that. We will do it. We wanted to sort of publicly say it so that everyone knows that this is coming. Did that inspire any rage online? Oh, please, we got someone in the room.
I think someone already covered what I'm going to say, but I just want to put a different angle to it. So one of the things we could do is if we decide on, let's say we hear about VEX and CSAP and all those things. If you want to implement something, put some kind of a proposal. This is what we are proposing, and anyone who wants to comment on it, they can comment, and you put a timeline. The decision will be made by this date, and then we are going to do proof of concept on it. So you put some kind of an urgency. Whoever wants to contribute, that contribute in that time frame, and then we move on. Main point is we need to act. We need to move fast. Everyone is asking for questions, and I just feel there are just too many questions out there.
Yes, they're just, even in the last little few minutes that we've been talking, we're like, oh wow, there's so many great ideas. We can't possibly do them either inside our CISA team, or even worse if we try to get your direct input. So being targeted about that is a great idea. Having deadlines drives action. Anyone else have thoughts about sort of the work stream model? What else you'd like to see? I can float some tentative ideas. So as we plan SBOM-rama, you notice that we've been keeping a very tight schedule. because there was so much stuff that we wanted to cover. And a number of you reached out saying, hey, I'd love to present. We would love you to present. But we wanted to sort of cover the waterfront of the things that we were tracking. But we don't want to have, a monthly 6-hour meeting. And so one other model is going to be to say, hey, can we have 60 or 90-minute webinars where we invite people to sort of, again, present success stories, talk about how they're implementing it in large companies, focusing on particular niches. Is that something you'd like to see? Getting some nods they'll be recorded so that when you can't make it, because again, you're all ridiculously busy and important people, but we want to sort of have these as resources, and you can focus on the ones you like. What are some of the other things that we can do in sort of more agile units that you like? I've got a 2-finger online. Justin?
I actually meant it because there's 2 questions, but
okay.
perhaps 2 fingers. Charlie Hart?
I think this is Charlie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Beautiful. So I think we should start thinking about the gradual slowdown of the emphasis on S-bombs and a gradual increase on related topics, VEX being a great one, I think, but also other supply chain issues, identification, provenance, pedigree, other security-related things that we could do some good on, because we have momentum, we've got a team, we've got some passion, and we can do a lot of good, I think, outside of S-bombs, which, again, somebody else said this earlier, but victim of their own success. We're pretty much in the mainstream now, and we should, I think, start thinking about less mainstream things.
I am very excited about working on things other than S-bombs, so that's a great idea.
Me too.
Yeah. Let's go with Cassie and then back online.
Okay, so I definitely want to agree with what Charlie just said, because you all know me. The other piece you mentioned about the webinars, it's hard to attend all those meetings. And so if we could have a short summary on some of the key things, I think that would help us with Josh's comment about being a leverage, what's going on in those. And also that's where it would be good to bring in those ancillary groups for like Skit and everybody else, because I missed certain presentations, or we're having to do them multiple times to hit all the different working groups.
Great. No, thank you. That's great feedback. Online, Justin?
Bill? Go ahead, Bill.
Hey, I'm off mute. Great. Good afternoon, this is Bill Pelletier. Just quick observation, I guess, Alan. Kind of saw this already in the sharing and tooling work groups the last number of months. But it seems like the breadth of interest here is far exceeding what we can do with the current structure. I mean, I have my own interests with embedded devices and embedded systems. What I want to see out of SBOM isn't going to work for cloud. It's not going to work for discrete systems.
Sure.
Are
Bill,
we?
30 seconds. In 30 seconds, can you offer a suggestion about how we can do it better?
Not in 30 seconds.
Okay. We will follow up. And again, we've got sort of one last comment in the room. But before we do, and I'll mention this at the end as well, we want your feedback, both about this event, but more importantly, how we can build this better. And so we're going to be asking, please tell us what we can do better, right? It is a cliche to say that government can't actually predict everything. And this is now such a big and complex space with so many amazing perspectives that we need to sort of have that feedback and keep that channel open. Okay, our last comment.
Last comment. So I will say we did an event with Josh between the healthcare industry and critical infrastructure that I thought was a great model, where he came in and talked about, hey, this is what we did in healthcare, learn from us when you're trying to deploy within another sector. That was so well received that paid dividends month over month over month. So when we start thinking about success stories, we may want to also do it in a way where you've got one industry talking to another industry to say, this is how we got the skin knees. Don't make the same mistakes. and have those presenters be, you know, from the other industry, the ones that are speaking to and answering the questions, instead of the evangelical, this is why everybody in critical infrastructure, you should do this. So just a point, it was super effective.
I love it, and I'll call out Charlie, who as AutoISEC was standing up, did that for the automotive sector, which is he went and talked and brought in Josh and Jennings and all the people that have been doing it. All right, we are out of time for this discussion. I want to thank everyone who chimed in the chat. I know it was pretty active. I want to thank everyone who stood up publicly and shared ideas. I know it's still kind of tricky. And I'm really happy that it wasn't just a small group of people. I think we heard from an amazing range of folks and voices. So thank you all for doing that. We're now going to sort of pivot to our last three presentations. And we're going to start off. Are we ready with Sean?
We actually have a break scheduled.
Oh,
yeah.
My goodness. I almost deprived you of a break. Thank you. All right, everyone go. Make a friend on the chat. We've got 10 minutes, and then we'll hear from some folks in the U.S. government, and we're going to close out with an international perspective, and we'll share a little bit of update there.
And we do have Sean, so she'll be ready to go when we get back in 10 minutes.
Thanks, Justin.